All right, folks, I think I'll call the meeting to order. As required under the Planning Act, a public meeting is being held prior to the committee making a decision on these applications. First of all, I will introduce the Committee of Adjustment. We've got Councillor Yeo, Mrs. Richardson, Mrs. Archer, Mr. Obam-Sawin, Mr. Strangway, and I'm Mr. Robertson. And staff present, we've got and these are remotely, of course, because of the present situation. We've got Mr. Hawley, the Manager of Planning, David Harding, Planner 2, Kent Staton, Planner 2. Here present, our Acting Secretary Treasurer, Mr. Lahi, and our Recording Secretary, Ms. Crockford-Toomey. All right. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda as printed? Ms. Richardson, Mr. Obam-Sawin. Comments or questions? All those in favor? And that carries. Thank you. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? Being none. Approval of the minutes of the last meeting, and I'll have to have people who are present. So, Mrs. Archer, Councillor Yeo, comments or questions? All those in favor? And that carries. Thank you. All right. The committee will hear comments, gather information, and may ask questions to clarify statements made. The committee may ask and answer questions or redirect questions to the appropriate person. Please note that any information or comments given to the committee during this meeting, they're considered evidence. We will first hear from staff, then the applicant or his or her agent. We will then hear from any person in support of or from those who have questions, concerns, or are opposed to the application. Finally, the applicant or his or her agent will have an opportunity to respond to any of the statements made to the committee. And I guess we can say, for the benefit of everyone out there, we will afford you 10 minutes to speak. No one ever takes that long, but I would appreciate it when you come online. I don't think, Joel, if I may, there's no one listening anyway, is there? Or is there? Other than staff? No, that's okay, don't worry about it. I'll just go through this. All right, because I don't think there are, but who knows. Anyway, so please state your name when you come up on the video, and we will proceed from there. All right. We're dealing, first of all, with file number D20-2020-024, and the location is 64 Iris Drive, Geographic Township of Fenland. Mr. Staton, go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The application involves the construction of a new 72.466 square meter or 780 square foot detached garage with storage loft, and to recognize the construction of a 3.55 square meter or 38 square foot pump house associated with a septic system. The detached garage is not proposed to contain habitable space. The applicant initially proposed review of the detached garage in 2015 through a pre-screening application that was withdrawn. Relief was being sought for a reduced front yard setback and an increase in the maximum allowable height for the proposed detached garage. Through the pre-screening process, the height of the garage was lowered to comply with the zoning bylaw. Additional variances pertaining to the maximum lot coverage for accessory buildings and structures, as well as the pump house for the septic system, were identified. Recognition of the pump house within the front yard is also being sought. The distance from the front lot line is also being sought to comply with the zoning bylaw. Through conducting a site visit associated with the application, it was determined that the eastern side of a wooden deck associated with an open building permit application from 2008 was closer than the allowable side yard setback for accessory structures. The application was not deemed complete until direction regarding modifications to the deck were provided by the applicant. Next slide, please. The subject property is situated on the south shore of Balsam Lake along a row of shoreline residential lots. The dwellings along Iris Drive are moderately sized and comprised of a varying built form. The 1.5-story single detached dwelling was constructed several years ago with a fairly modern design. Next slide, please. This slide shows a site plan with the proposed location of the detached garage as well as the location of the septic system pump house. As you can see, the proposed garage is in the bottom corner with the pump house to the left or the western side of the subject lot. Next slide, please. Elevation drawings showing the western and southern or Iris Drive facing elevations for the detached garage are provided here. Next slide, please. Again, elevation drawings showing the north or house facing and east or vegetation facing elevations for the garage. Next slide, please. The detached garage will be constructed using similar stone and brick composition with an identical color scheme to the dwelling unit shown on the left. Since the height of the garage at 4.97 meters to the midpoint of the rafter complies with the maximum allowable height provision for accessory structures, and there are no buildings or structures to the east of the proposed location of the garage, there are no anticipated massing impacts from the detached garage. The photo on the right shows the wooded buffer directly across the street to the south. Next slide, please. Before I go into analysis, I wanted to illustrate the types of built form in the immediate neighborhood. This slide showcases the properties to the immediate west of the subject lands. Note that all lots are bordered by substantial vegetative buffers. Next slide, please. Shown here are the two lots to the east, which can barely be seen in terms of the dwelling units as a result of the mature vegetation. Next slide, please. The subject property is surrounded on all sides by dense vegetative buffers, which effectively screen the proposed garage from the neighboring lots as well as partially from the road when traveling westbound on Iris Drive as seen on the right. The photo on the left shows the footprint of the garage looking to the east. Next slide, please. The photos on the right and left show the footprint of the garage as compliant with both the interior side yard setback and spatial separation from the dwelling as measured on site. Next slide, please. Photos showing the vegetative screening existing along the eastern lot line, with the photo on the right taken from Iris Drive looking to the west, effectively concealing the garage from the road when traveling west. Next slide, please. The location of the existing septic system and driveway to the west of the proposed garage prohibits the footprint of the garage from being situated in the western front yard. The linear bed of the tertiary septic system and existing holding tank confine the garage to the proposed location. Note the location of the septic system pump house as essentially being set back at the same distance as the proposed detached garage. A new cedar fence was installed in addition to the shrubs on the western lot line, screening any views of the pump house from the neighboring lot. The photo on the right shows how access is achieved through the side yard to the west, as well as the size of the cedar hedge along the western edge of the property. Next slide, please. Overall, the proposal complies with the maximum lot coverage within the RR3 zone category. The modest 5.83% increase in lot coverage for accessory structures acknowledges the proposed detached garage at 5.04%, the boathouse at 2.68%, the attached wooden deck at 5.86%, and the septic system pump house at 0.25%. The overall area of the accessory structures is 198 square meters, which is less than the maximum allowable 225 square meters. Unlike most zoning bylaws within the city, the wooden deck does factor into the calculation for lot coverage within the Township of Fenland zoning bylaw. The wooden deck is attached to the dwelling on the left. The boathouse can be seen in the distance in the photo on the right. Next slide, please. It is important to note that the gazebo shown on the right, located along the shoreline, will be removed upon completion of construction. The gazebo was acknowledged during the pre-screening process, and the applicant has agreed to remove the structure. A condition is recommended in order to confirm removal of the structure. Moreover, upon conducting the site inspection associated with the variances, planning staff identified the wooden deck associated with an open building permit had been constructed approximately 0.9 meters from the eastern lot line. The findings were conveyed to the owner, who has agreed to relocate the eastern edge of the deck to reflect a 1.3 meter minimum side yard setback. A condition is recommended in order to confirm compliance with the zoning bylaw. The location of the deck relative to the eastern property line is shown on the left slide. Next slide, please. These photos illustrate the non-compliance with the deck and the interior side yard setbacks. Comments have been received from Engineering and Corporate Assets Division, Community Services Division, and Kawartha Conservation, indicating no objections with the proposal. Building Division notes that a building permit is required for the garage. As the pad has been poured, construction began without a permit. The supervisor of Part 8 sewage systems notes that a sewage system has been constructed on the property under file F1808. The driveway to access the garage will be maintained wholly in front of the dwelling to avoid the septic system envelope. Otherwise, they have no concerns with the proposal. Public comments in opposition to the application were received from the following individuals: Michelle Murcott of 52 Iris Drive and Alan Foster of 88 Iris Drive. Primarily, the concerns relate to construction materials associated with the completion of the open building permit and storage of these items within the front yard. Other concerns relate to the open building permit, which planning cannot speak to, and potential for living space within the storage loft of the garage. A question was also raised with respect to an additional structure being located within the front yard. Through conversations with the owner, there is a desire to complete both building permits at the same time. Materials in the front yard will either be used for the construction of the garage, stored within the garage, or removed from the property. The storage loft is not designed for habitable space, and the owner has no desire to make it such. In terms of the additional structure within the front yard, the only structure subject to the application is the septic pump house. I note to committee that I have spoken to both individuals in opposition of the application, and they are satisfied with the responses with respect to the aforementioned concerns identified. As such, based on the contents of the report, staff respectfully recommends approval of the application, subject to the conditions identified within the report. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Well done, Mr. Stainton. Committee, are there any questions of the planner? Yes, Mr. Strangway.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm concerned about this open permit. How long has this permit been open? Is it since 2008? And is this dwelling finished yet or not?
Through you, Mr. Chair, my understanding is that the building permit has been open since 2008. As to whether the dwelling is completed, I would have to defer to the building division to render that decision. On the outside, it does look constructed, but again, I will defer that to the building division.
That is the concern I have, and that as I look at these photos that are up now, it looks like there's still scaffolding and so on. What means do we as a city have to see that these permits do get completed? That's 12 years since this permit was opened.
Through you, Mr. Chair, my understanding is that there is a history associated with this file. However, in terms of the processes surrounding building permits, their issuance, their longevity, I would have to defer to the building division for comment on that matter.
Okay, and the pump house, what's the square footage of the pump house?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I believe it is 38 square feet, or 3.55 square meters.
I didn't think you needed a permit for anything under 108 square feet. So what's the reason that this part of the application's here?
Through you, Mr. Chair, notwithstanding the fact that a building permit is not required and was not required for the septic system, the structure does meet the definition of a structure within the Township of Fenland zoning bylaw, and therefore subject to the provisions of the zoning bylaw.
Being a pump house, I don't believe it can be moved now that the septic system's in place, can it?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I would have to defer to someone like the supervisor of Part 8 sewage systems in order to determine that. However, my belief is that it cannot be moved. And it perhaps was an oversight as part of the permitting process initially.
Thanks, Kent. One final question, and you alluded to it. We also are dealing with a situation here where the foundation is already in for this garage, and that was done without a building permit. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that is correct.
Thanks for those answers, Kent. Greatly appreciated.
Mr. Stainton, just a question from me then. If that's the case with respect to the foundation for the garage, the building department, then I believe there is a fine levy system with respect to that. And again, I realize this may be putting you in a spot, but what is the process with respect to that already being built without a permit? Do you know if they are presently investigating that situation?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I do believe they are investigating. However, in terms of the processes or fees that are associated with that, again, I would defer to building division for the particulars. Because
my concern is if we were to okay it, and then through some process, they've told it's not in the right place or whatever, it's got to be moved, then where are we with our application?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I can confirm through being on site and through measurements that while there may not be a permit issued for the pad, there is a 1.2 meter setback from the property line that from the side lot line as well as from the dwelling, which complies with the zoning bylaw. However, I do appreciate the concerns with respect to the foundation, or sorry, the pad being poured without a permit.
Thank you. Councillor Yeo.
Hi, and through you, Mr. Chair. Just as a builder, put the builder hat on for a minute, you technically don't need a permit to pour concrete on your lot. It's landscaping until you go to build something on it. So the onus would be on the building department now to make sure that pad is substantial enough to hold a building, and that would be up to the owner to prove that, so.
I guess that just adds further to mine then. No permit required, but obviously the quality of the pad has to be such as to support that garage structure. What if it's not? Oh, so yeah. Holly, go ahead.
I would respectfully suggest that, you know, if the pad is in the correct spot and it does meet the requirements for the building department, then the committee should be comfortable approving it. If it isn't substantial enough and it doesn't meet the requirements, then they would be required either to upgrade it or to pull it back out again and then simply report in the same place. So I think as long as we're on board with the location and so on and so forth, I feel that should probably give committee some comfort in terms of that. Just to answer Mr. Strangway's question with respect to the existing permit that's out there, that's still open, I believe that the building department will work to try to close that off as well. They have been working over the last number of years to close off all outstanding building permits. And if this one is outstanding, yes, they will be working to try to close that one off as well. Thank you.
Yeah, I guess that's my question, is the policing aspect of it too, because we've been waiting 12 years for one to close, and here we are with another one that was built, again, as Councillor Yeo indicated, without a permit, but now they want to put a structure on it. Yeah, all right. Ms. Archer.
Just a quick question, please, through you to Mr. Stainton. My package didn't contain a page 2 of the KRC letter. Am I correct in assuming that they have no objection?
Through you, Mr. Chair, comments were received by Kawartha Region Conservation Authority yesterday regarding the file, and they do not have any concerns with respect to the application.
Anything further from committee? Mr. Richardson?
Through you, although I don't believe this technically affects the minor variance, there are a number of concerns with respect to the right-of-way. Is that going to be forwarded on to some other division to be dealt with?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm unfamiliar as to what right-of-way is being alluded to. Iris Drive is a public road. I don't believe there are any right-of-ways in the vicinity.
Sorry, I got the wrong file.
Don't feel bad, we all do that. Yes, Mr. Olba.
In regards to the chairman's issue with the maybe that the foundation is not proper, I would consider we should have a condition on that just to make sure. You know, a simple little wording stating the fact that if it does not comply, if it's not a proper foundation, it has to be, you know, other things, you know. Mind you, it is a building permit issue, but if we give them the okay, seems kind of awkward.
Perhaps we could leave that to the motion stage, and then if you feel strong enough, we could try, you could absolutely try something like that. Anything further from committee? All right. Is the applicant here? Do you wish to speak to the application?
Yes,
Yep.
please.
Yes, your name, sir?
Vin T. Sanson.
Thank you, go ahead.
First of all, thank you very much. So first, I'm going to speak to the delay since 2008. And the main reason is I have 3 children, 2 doctors, and a lawyer, and they all went to university at the same time. And that caused the expenses. And they're finished now, which is why starting last year, I started working on it full time. And with the only thing I'm standing inside there, put permanent one. Other than that, everything else is ready to close the permit. For the garage, there was a misunderstanding. I actually had a building permit, and then we applied to rebuild the whole house, and the garage was included as part of the building permit for the new house. So the old permit expired, which was only for the garage only, and it wasn't included in the new permit, which was for the structure, which is why it wasn't actually no permit. It's just a miscommunication as to which permit applied and which permit got expired. So that's why that happened. Having said that, it doesn't matter whether you know, in your wisdom you don't approve it. That can just be a carport only. It can be moved, it can be cemented around, paved over, whatever the case is. So that really isn't an issue in terms of building. The structure itself hasn't started. For all intents and purposes, it's just a carport for the time being. And those are my comments. Unless you have any questions for me.
Questions? Mr. Strongway?
I'd like further information on this carport. I don't understand the difference between a carport and a garage as far as the permit is concerned. And I'm not sure whether the owner's saying he's now asking for a carport rather than a garage.
No, perhaps I should have said just a parking pad, not a carport, parking pad. So in the wisdom of the building department yourself, if something is improved, that's not a problem. It can be put somewhere else in that area. But I just want to let you know the actual building hasn't started. It's just a cement work, and for all intent and purposes, it's just a parking pad.
Mr.
But
Stainton?
my understanding was that there was a building permit in place, and unfortunately, there was a miscommunication as to which one applied.
Mr. Stainton, I'm finding this as clear as mud. What is your understanding of what's going on?
Through you, Mr. Chair, my understanding is that the pad was poured. There is an electrical panel attached to it. And through the conversations with the owner, the desire is such that he wants to complete the garage simultaneously with closing off this building permit. As per his personal circumstances, he does suggest a desire to complete this, and it did look like when I did look inside the dwelling that there was construction underway.
Currently, all construction inside is completed with the exception of putting the permanent stairs inside. And the building inspector said once he put that in, then he'll come back for the final inspection. But currently we are operating under an occupancy permit. So occupancy permit was granted in December 2019 and would be an occupied building.
Yeah. Questions of the applicant? All right. Have you more to say, sir, or is that it?
No, that's it. Thank you.
All right. Did I see your hand there, Mr. Hawley? No? No. All right. Very good. Thank you, sir. All right. And there's no questions of the applicant? All right. Is there anyone online wishing to speak in support of this application? In support of the application? Anyone online wishing to speak in opposition to this application? Opposition to the application? Being none, committee.
I would like to approve this application on the pretense, though, that we add a condition, a simple condition that the building department that the concrete pad is satisfactory for a garage to be built on it.
Right, and I would just ask, I guess, Mr. Stainton or Mr. Hawley, are we being redundant by asking that because the building department's involved, or Mr. Hawley, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I know that the building department will check and will require the applicant to demonstrate that the parking pad is sufficient, or that this foundation is sufficient for the purposes of a structure to be put on top. So with respect, I don't think there's necessarily a need to add this condition in. It is something that the building department will take into consideration through the permitting process. Thank you.
Are you content with that, Mr. Williams?
Yes, I will.
And then, as printed?
As printed.
Do I have a seconder? Okay, Mrs. Archer. Further comments or questions? All those in favor? And that carries. Your application goes, sir.
Thank you very much.
Moving right along, we're now dealing with file number D20-2020-031, and this is 11 Distillery Street, the former village of Omimi. Mr. Harding, go ahead, sir. Welcome. Mr. Harding is not working with the audio.
Oh, is that better, committee?
It's much better.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon, committee. The purpose of this application is to request relief from the exterior side yard setback in order to permit the construction of a dwelling. As committee will see shortly, the dwelling is currently under construction. It is our office's understanding that when a foundation control certificate was submitted for review with the building division, that the proximity between the building and the eastern or also exterior side lot line had been identified as being deficient. So this property is located in the southeast area of the former village of Omimi. Next slide, please. And as committee can see, there are two unopened road allowances, both to the north and to the east of this property. It is specifically relief that is sought from the eastern lot line that borders the unopened road allowance known as Hughes Street. Next slide, please. And here we have the site plan. So it's specifically relief that's being sought for the attached garage on the right or east side of the dwelling. Next slide, please. So here is the dwelling under construction with the garage noted on the right. The image on the right, or the photograph on the right side of the slide, is centered more or less on where this unopened road allowance is. So as we can see, it's fairly well vegetated, providing a fair degree of distance between the subject property and the other lot on Distillery Street to the east. Next slide, please. And in this picture, on the left, I've walked a little bit further down Distillery Street, looking back towards the subject property. We can see the garage currently under construction about centered in that photograph there. And then the photograph on the right is the first property as you enter Distillery Street. Next slide, please. And here we have a picture where Kenta is demonstrating approximately where this lot line is on the parcel. Next slide, please. And then another shot as well, this time standing in the unopened road allowance, looking towards the dwelling on the photograph to the left, and then walking back into the rear yard of the subject property, looking towards Distillery Street on that photograph on the right. So as we can see here, this is a neighborhood that has very much a rural feel due to the size of the lots and the generous spacing between the buildings on the lots and the lot lines, and that having the dwelling slightly closer to this unopened road allowance is not changing that character at all, and is not going to impede the function of this road allowance should it ever be developed into a proper assumed municipal road. Staff is of the opinion that the proposal meets the 4 tests for minor variance due to this assessment, and respectfully recommends that the application be granted subject to the conditions identified in the report. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Harding. As usual, well done. Questions of the planner? Being none. All right. Is the applicant online? Does the applicant wish to speak to the application? Does the applicant wish to speak to the application? All right. It would appear not. Oh, I see a high sign. Yes, sir. Are you hearing us?
Good afternoon. I'm here now, I believe.
And what is your, and you, would you give us your name?
Yeah, it's Tom DeBoer with TD Consulting. I represent the builder on this particular one.
All right, go ahead, sir.
The minor variance is a bit of unusual circumstance in this case. There is an adjacent dwelling to the to the west of the property, which had a very large vegetated strip, and part of the original site plan was to remove that vegetated strip. As a nicety to the neighbor, they decided to sort of pick up the house and move it a couple of feet to the east to sort of compensate for the remaining vegetation to all remain. And the builder at the time was sort of thinking, well, I still got a lot of room for my side yard setback, not realizing that it was an unopened right of way. And that's sort of where we're getting ourselves into the situation right now. And again, the planner has done a fantastic job describing the situation as well. And we too feel that it's still within keeping of the neighborhood and that the right of way itself will not be compromised by this structure. And if there's any other questions, feel free to extend them.
Thank you, sir. We always appreciate positive comments about our staff, so thank you for that. Questions of the applicant? All right, being none, thank you very much, sir. Is there anyone online wishing to speak in support of this application? In support of the application? Anyone wishing to speak in opposition to the application? Opposition to the application? Committee. Mrs. Richardson.
As recommended by staff.
All right. All right. Comments or questions by committee? Okay. All in favor? And that carries. Thank you. Granted, sir, your application.
Thank you very much.
All right, we're now dealing with file number D20-2020-033, and this is 12 Treewood Lane, Geographic Township of Bexley. And again, Mr. Staton, go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Disappeared on us for a minute.
Yeah, it wouldn't let me turn my video on, so now it's I'm here in the flesh. So the proposal is for 12 Treewood Lane in the former township of Bexley, and relief is sought to reduce the minimum exterior side yard setback of 7.5 meters to 1.2 meters in order to permit the construction of a new detached dwelling and deck. Again, the proposal involves the demolition of an existing one-story detached dwelling and wooden deck and the construction of a new 152 square meter or approximately 1,600 square foot detached two-story dwelling and attached wooden deck. I want to emphasize that in the report, I did reference the dwelling as being one story at times. And I wanted to make it clear that it is a two-story dwelling. Following correspondence with the Realty Services Division, it was determined that the lands to the north of the subject lands are owned by the city of Kawartha Lakes in the form of a road allowance that facilitates public access to Balsam Lake. As such, the property is considered a corner lot, and therefore the side yard is considered an exterior side yard for the purposes of implementing the zoning bylaw. Next slide, please. The subject property is situated along the shoreline of a southwestern bay of Balsam Lake. This specific parcel is surrounded by smaller shoreline residential lots comprised of cottages and single detached dwellings. The lots in the neighborhood are flat with a variety of built form ranging from quaint bungalows to modern two-story infill development, as you will see shortly in the presentation. Next slide, please. Here is the proposed site plan showing the proposed location of the new dwelling and wooden deck. Note both the exterior side yard setbacks and the shoreline setback are being improved. Next slide, please. Elevation drawings are shown here, noting the east or the water side on the top and the western elevations. The proposed design of the dwelling incorporates elements of modern and traditional design and will add to the overall character of the neighborhood. The double patio doors provide for a transition to the amenity space within the rear yard towards the lake. Next slide, please. Shown here on the left is the front of the subject property taken from the opposite side of Treewood Lane, with the neighboring lot to the south shown on the right. The presence of detached accessory structures in the front yard of the subject lands, as well as on the lot to the south, provides increased privacy for the lot by essentially screening the entire width of the property with the exception of the driveway. Both accessory structures were constructed in 1960, according to MPAC, and predate the first zoning bylaw for the township of Bexley, which was in 1979. Next slide, please. Shown here are the neighboring lots to the north. Next slide, please. The subject property, which is shown looking north on the left and west on the right, contains dense cedar trees along the northern lot line running the entire length of the parcel. It combines and forms a buffer that provides from the width of the road allowance to provide a substantial privacy from the neighboring lot to the north. The overall footprint of the development is being shifted to the west of the parcel, and amenity space, again in the form of a rear yard, is being increased. The location of the septic system to the south prohibits any further relocation towards the middle of the lot. The slight increase in lot coverage does not impair the area of available landscape amenity space or the appearance of the property. Next slide, please. As seen on the right, as you can see in the far background, the boathouse and a mature cedar hedge running the entire length of the southern property line effectively screens the property from the neighboring lot. No adverse impacts to the neighborhood are anticipated due to the presence of the the vegetated buffers. On the photo on the left gives you an appreciation for the density of the cedar hedge along the northern property line. Next slide, please. The exterior side yard in this case functions as an interior side yard, as previously mentioned, as the road allowance it abuts is densely vegetated and provides the ability for residents to access Balsam Lake. An interior side yard serves primarily as a space to provide for lot and building maintenance, establish utility infrastructure, and facilitate access between the front and rear lots. The proposed exterior side yard distance of 1.2 meters is of sufficient space to provide for lot and building maintenance, with the opposite yard providing ample space for accessibility to the rear. In fact, the proposed 1.2 meter setback improves the current 0.2 meter exterior side yard setback of the dwelling. The photo on the right shows the road allowance in question with the cedar hedge on the left. And again, the neighboring lot is on the right side. Next slide, please. It is understood that a portion of the shoreline is under ownership of the Trent Severn Waterway. The owner is in the process of purchasing the abutting shore lands from the TSW. As a recommended condition of approval, the purchase and melding of the aforementioned lands to the existing lot must be accomplished through approval of a deeming bylaw. Comments were received from Building Division, Engineering and Corporate Assets Division, Kawartha Conservation, Community Services Division, and from the Part 8 Sewage Systems Supervisor with no concerns to the proposal. Documentation has also been provided from the Trent Severn Waterway indicating that the process pertaining to the purchase of the shorelands is underway and should be completed in the very near future. Public comments pertaining to the application were received from the following individuals: David and Louise Grandy of Treewood Lane, June Comden of 3 Farmingdale Lane, Lorraine McRae of 19 Treewood Lane, Radmila and Miroslav Rakita of no affixed address, and Gordana and Vasily Tomich of 11 Treewood Lane. Specific concerns from all parties related to any potential sale and closure of this part of Block M or the unopened road allowance to access Balsam Lake through the application and in the future, as well as the trimming of the cedar hedge between the access and the lot in question. While the sale and closure of the land is not subject to this application, any disposition of publicly owned lands would require oversight by Realty Services Division through the Land Management Committee. As of this morning, I can verify that Realty Services has not received an application to purchase and close the road allowance. The sale of land in this case, in the case of this application, is owned by the Trent Severn Waterway and not the lands to the north. With respect to the hedge trimming, the site visit illustrated that some of the hedges are on publicly owned lands and some are also on the subject property. As shown, I was going to show you on the photo on the right, but that is okay. The applicant advises that the owner intends on maintaining as much of the hedge as possible for privacy screening. Applicants were provided contact information for the, and when I say applicants, I mean people that wrote in with concerns, were provided information on the respective area of the roads department, which may oversee the maintenance of the road allowance, although it does appear as though local residents are tending to the maintenance of the lawn along the access. Overall, the maintenance of the access is not a planning matter to be discussed through this forum. Based on the contents of the report, staff respectfully recommends approval of the application subject to the conditions identified therein. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Questions? Yes, Mr. Strangway, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, Kent. It's my understanding that it's the policy of the City of Kawartha Lakes or Council that we don't sell any of these properties leading to waterfront. So that would it be fair to say this is a moot point and any change there would have to come to council? And I don't believe there's any plans to bring something like that to council.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I would say that is a fair assertion.
Thanks. The only other question, a couple of questions I have is I see there's two buildings out at the road, garage, storage. There's a new house going and there's a boathouse. Where are we at with the amount of building structures on this lot?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I believe we are at the maximum allowable for accessory structures, which is 3, I believe, in Bexley zoning bylaw. I may have to check that. Through the pre-screening process, it was identified that the application was not exceeding that, that provision of the zoning bylaw, though.
Okay, thank you. Just one final question. You'd mentioned a septic system. If looking at the diagram, am I correct that this is actually a holding tank rather than a septic system?
Through you, Mr. Chair, you are correct.
Thanks, Kent. Greatly appreciate it.
Yes, Mrs. Archer, go ahead.
Through you, please, to Mr. Stainton. On Appendix C, please, the survey, the sketch of surveyor, would you please point out the land that's referenced that's owned by the Trent system?
Certainly, if I can see it. So I don't know if you can see my cursor. However, it is the lands on the far, basically the lands that are taken to the east of the existing property line. And I believe they are identified as Part 1 of Plan 57R dash 10663.
I just, in looking at it, it seems to me that the southern portion will extend about 2 feet further onto the neighbor's property if those lines are, you know, they don't line up with the property is what I'm trying to say.
I do see what you're saying. I believe the intent is to take it out parallel to the existing property line. The filled area that's identified on lot 12 is actually a boathouse or retaining wall. It's a retaining wall actually, and it's on an angle, which kind of creates an illusion that it's parallel to the shoreline, but it's not. Lands will not be purchased on the lot to the south.
Okay, my concern then is that if that is in fact part 1, what they've outlined, they're going to have another survey, which will, and we're dealing with the federal government, will 24 months be sufficient to get all that completed so that we can complete this file?
I believe there is a more accurate depiction of the shorelines or description that has been provided by the Trent Severn Waterway. Just give me 1 second while I take a look for that correspondence. It does identify, I have a letter here dated October 5th that it says part of Lot A, Concession 2, Geographic Township of Bexley, being part 1 of 57R-10663, and that the application has been accepted for the sale of the federal crown land and has been approved by Parks Canada Ontario Waterways due to the COVID-19 pandemic. There has been a significant delay in getting documents registered, but the process for Sam Thornbury to acquire Part 1 on 57R-10663 is currently underway and is expected to be completed in the coming months. If the City of Kawartha Lake staff have any concern with regards to the purchase of the federal crown land, you can reach out to me directly, and it is signed sincerely Craig Bolton, who is the real property officer for Parks Canada.
You think that we'll be fine with the 24 months to get everything completed?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I do. The deeming bylaw is actually been applied for and is just a matter of being deemed complete subject to approval of this application, which will then essentially tie things together with the Trent Severn Waterways process in order to seamlessly meld the two parts together.
Further questions of the planner? All right, being none. Is the applicant online? Does the applicant wish to speak to the application? Can't hear him, Joel. Yeah. He was struggling before with it, so. Can he hear me, I wonder? We'll try it. Mr. Thornberry, we can't hear you. You'll have to push another button there. No. He's taking the time to speak to it, so let's give it a couple of minutes.
Excuse me.
All right, we'll take 5 until such time as we can engage Mr. Thornberry in conversation. or further time today. All right, Councillor Yo, and seconded by Mr. Obam-Sawin. Is everyone in favor of that? All right, that carries. Thank you. All right, moving on to number 4. This is file number D20-2020-034, and this is 100 Leslie Frost Lane, Geographic Township of Fenelon. And we have Mr. Harding again. Go ahead, sir. I see Mr. Stainton. I don't see Mr. Harding.
I can run, see if Mr. Harding is available. How about that?
Sounds like a plan.
Very well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the purpose of this variance application is to request relief from the minimum lot area requirements for a minimum or for an existing lot of record in order to permit further development on the lot, and also to reduce the interior side yard setback from 2.3 meters to 1.5 meters because we're going up an additional story, which means that that setback on that built form is increased within the confines of the bylaw. So the subject property is located at the tail end of Leslie Frost Lane, as seen on the subject property on the subject map there. Next slide, please. So Leslie Frost Lane is an assumed road down to a couple of addresses north of this parcel, at which point it narrows further and it becomes a private right-of-way serving this property and the lots immediately around it. Next slide, please. So as we can see here, there is a what we'll call a partial second story, or a second story over top of a portion of the building footprint that is proposed. And this is going to take the existing bedrooms that were on the main floor, the two of them, and move them up to the second floor. Next slide, please. So here we have the side yard profiles of what the final built form will look like, both of the second story as well as the covered porch, which is going to be fronting on the private right-of-way. Next slide, please. And here we have a view on the top of what the finished product will look like standing from Leslie Frost Road, as well as on the picture on the bottom from the shoreline. Next slide, please. So the image on the left is coming down Leslie Frost Drive, and the subject property is positioned right in the middle of that image. And then the picture on the right is me standing right in front of the subject property. Next slide, please. And this is me pivoting in the driveway from that second image, looking out east across the private right-of-way and the parcels there. Next slide, please. And this image is just taking more of an enhanced look at this interior side yard where the reduction is sought. Next slide, please. So I'm standing up against the house, looking out towards the neighboring property to the north, and showing committee what is basically there, what could be impacted from this additional added height from the wall that's directly to the back of where this photograph is taken. So as you can see here, there's a kind of a cutout from the property to the north here. The house kind of goes around in this little square, and there aren't any windows directly abutting the lot line because we have that kind of step back for the house there on the image that's on the left there. For the photo on the right, we've got a shed of some sort or other accessory building. So there's not anticipated to be any adverse massing impacts by facilitating this proposal. Next slide, please. And here we have in the photograph on the left, another picture of that interior side yard. So it currently functions to provide some access between the front and rear yards, and also as a utility space. And then the picture on the right is just me sitting on that dock centered on the parcel, looking out towards the parcel. Next slide, please. And then this one is showing the larger interior side yard, which is not being impacted by this proposal, to facilitate access between the front and the rear yards for any larger items. Since the writing of this report, comments were received from Colleen and Rodney Cook of 69 Indian Trail. So that is the parcel that is directly across the right-of-way from this property. And they were concerned about potential impacts to their property as a result of development. So I did pass those comments along to the property owner. They are aware of them, and they did advise back to me that even though this is not part of the scope of the variances being sought, if there are damages to the parcel, they will go and correct those on their own dollar. So staff is of the opinion that the proposal meets the 4 tests for minor variance due to the analysis in the report, and respectfully recommends that the applications be granted subject to the conditions noted in the report. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Harding. Are there any questions of the planner?
Please, to Mr. Harding, is it the intention of, this is maybe not a fair question for you, is it the intention of the owners to remain as a vacation dwelling?
I am not sure, but I believe that the owner is on the line, so I will defer to her.
And one other question. I noticed that you say there's no problem with the owner of 98, Leslie Frost Lane. What about the owner of 102? There's no visual problems with them either?
102 being the property to the south. In this case, those impacts weren't examined because the bylaw has a staggered side yard setback. So the lot line setback on that side complies with 3-meter requirement. So it's really only that narrower northern side yard that we had to look at as part of this proposal.
Further questions of the planner? All right. Is the applicant online? Does the applicant wish to speak to this application?
Hello, yes, I'm here. Good afternoon.
Yes.
Thank you for entertaining my proposal.
Yeah, your name is?
Patricia Jarvie.
Okay, go ahead, ma'am.
I have spoken with all of my neighbors in regard to my proposed second story, and other than the comment made by the Cooks, there is full support. And again, to reiterate that should there be any damage to the fence between my property, well, the right-of-way and the Cook's property, I would very definitely right it and take care of any reparation required.
All right, thank you for that. And Mrs. Archer, you had a question?
Through you, please. Is it your intent that this remain a vacation dwelling?
At this time, I have my primary residence in Port Perry.
Further questions of the applicant? All right, did you add anything further you wish to say?
No, I thank the committee for considering.
Yeah, thank you. All right. Is there anyone online wishing to speak in support of this application? In support of the application? Anyone online wishing to speak in opposition to the application? Opposition to the application? All right, being none. Committee. Mr. Strangway? All right, do I have a seconder? Mr. Obam-Sawin? Further comments or questions? All those in favor? And that carries. Thank you. All right, moving right along. We're now dealing with file number D20-2020-003, and this is a vacant lot, Sugar Bush Trail, Geographic Township of Fenland. Mr. Harding, go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just as a brief recap, because I know we did have internet connectivity issues the first time this came before you. The whole purpose for deferring the application was to allow further examination as to whether or not the proposed building footprint, which also included the septic footprint, was in the best place it could be in order to develop this parcel. Based on the comments that I had received previously from the neighbors, as well as comments received quite shortly before the meeting had taken place, there was still that outstanding question: could we do better? And we needed that time to review, to see whether or not there was an alternative that made more sense environmentally. So I do thank committee for that deferral. The owner and the applicant worked very hard with their sewage system designer and an environmental consultant to assess whether or not this was the correct location for this building footprint, and have submitted that documentation, which is within the report for committee's review. And based on what those professionals were saying, it is very clear that even though there may be some potential to move the septic system to the south, so it would kind of be side by side with the dwelling, that there would be more environmental impact through doing that, because that tile bed is going to be running downhill into the lake. Tile bed's going to be within that 15-meter buffer that is supposed to be that environmental buffer. So having the tile bed between the house and Sugarbush Trail provides that barrier. It allows the sewage system to drain to the north away from the shoreline. And then the comments from the environmental consultant, Dave Cunningham, spoke to the fact that there would be tree removal required already on the north side of the property to facilitate the house where it's proposed to be. If it were to move even further north and west to accommodate a tile bed in that southern area, we do anticipate that there is going to be more tree removal that would be required as part of that process, in addition to impacting that hedgerow that exists along the south line of the property. So in order to maintain tree cover, it really makes the most sense to keep the proposal where it has been proposed. The environmental consultant has also recommended a environmental buffer 3 meters in width be planted along the majority of the shoreline, save an area that would be kept lawn to facilitate access between the house and the dock there. So this environmental buffer would be planted with some native shrubs and ground cover in order to improve the buffer and the environmental quality of the property with respect to Cameron Lake. So I'm going to go through the photographs again with that additional analysis in mind. We have the slideshow going. Thank you very much. So here we have the subject property. It is the last undeveloped lot in this area on Sugarbush Trail, just north of Fenelon Falls. This is a peninsula within Cameron Lake. And this side of Sugarbush Trail faces the bay, sorry, a very shallow bay of Cameron Lake that faces into the mainland, being the eastern side of Cameron Lake. Next slide, please. So as you can see, the property has this unusual trapezoidal type shape. We have a northern lot line, which is much longer than the southern lot line. So we have an angular shoreline on the east side. Next slide, please. So we have a 1-story build proposed with walkout basement. So these are both the side yard views. Next slide, please. And then the view facing the road at the top and the view facing the shoreline on the bottom. So as we can see in those elevations, there is going to be a slight further projection towards the shoreline for that gable A-frame living room, but that is the extent of the projection, and it's coming down to a point. Most of the house is pretty much all linear. Next slide, please. So here we have on the image to the left, the subject property. So this image is actually taken looking north up Sugarbush Trail. And then the photograph on the right is me standing on Sugar Bush Trail looking out towards the bay. So in that second image, we can see the trees that are on the north and south sides of the property. Next slide, please. The image on the left is looking to the north of the property, and the image to the right is looking to the south. So that's just me pivoting a little bit more so committee can see the established hedgerows in both of those locations. Next slide, please. So I've walked into the property a bit more to get a better shot of the bay. Next slide, please. And this is going back a little bit to when there was snow last year, and I could actually walk out on the frozen bay. And both of these images are showing committee what the property looks like if you were on the water in relation to the built forms on either side of it. The image on the right being the arrow pointing towards where the subject property is. Next slide, please. So the image on the left is zooming in a little bit more to the subject property, and the image on the left is me doing a rough count for building heights for all the properties that kind of border this bay area. So we can see that we're in the 2-story, 1.5-story area for the majority of these builds. We do have one that is a single story without walkout basement. So this is just to illustrate to committee that the built form being proposed is very similar to, or in keeping with the built forms established by the other residences along this side of the road facing the bay. Next slide, please. So committee, I drew some lines in the following photograph. So this one is just as a reference point for you. So the purple is what I would refer to as the main wall of the dwelling, where most of the built form in the footprint is contained behind. The teal line is more the extent of the sides of this kind of A-frame projection of the central living space. And then the red is where that tip of that A-frame space would project furthest into the water setback area. So I've applied each of these lines on the following photographs. Next slide, please. So here we can see the dwelling is in relation to the site here. So we do have a bit of a slope down towards the water. So for the most part, that dwelling is kind of up on top of the slope, with just a tiny bit of it being the red at the most point there, being where it would come down to a point. And we can see that we're about in line with the door of the parcel to the north, just to have a reference point with other built form in the area. And then next slide, please. And because it's an angled shoreline, it is hard to get a sense of depth here, but I've done my best with both of these other photographs. So we can see in each of these images that we do still have a water yard retained to the extent possible, given the site constraints that we are confronted with. And committee would also keep in mind that based on the proposal as amended by the environmental consultant's comments, that there is going to be that vegetative buffer that continues to exist along the shoreline. Next slide, please. Or is that the final one? That's the final one. So if we could go back just a couple of slides. That one, yes, that one's fine. So based on the analysis of the site walks, as well as the further correspondence received from the sewage system designer and the environmental consultant, staff is of the opinion that this proposal meets the 4 tests for minor variance to the extent they can for this parcel to be developed, and respectfully recommends that the application be granted subject to the conditions identified in the report. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Harding. I must admit I was somewhat disheartened by your snow scenes, but so be it. Are there any questions of the planner?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. David, just one quick question. As we look at these slides here, and the slides are really helpful, the red line, how far is that from the shoreline?
Committee, I do have a survey here, so if you will allow me to quickly look at that, I will have a glance and see what it is. But whatever it is, I don't think that point is the closest point because we do have that angular shoreline. It is more the deck and built form in the southern corner, which is still the closest. But let me see what I have. I will just turn off my camera as I roll over here. Thank you for bearing with me, committee. So it turns out that we do have a surveyed, I'll get that later. We do have a surveyed measurement. So the surveyor is saying that it should be 11.6 meters between the point and the nearest section of shoreline.
Thanks for that, Dave. And what's the recommended distance from shoreline to, construction of a building? Is it 15 meters?
Through the chair, yes, that is correct.
Thank you.
Anything further from the planner? All right, none. Is the applicant online? Does the applicant wish to speak to the application?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman.
For the record, would you state your name, sir, please?
Doug Carroll.
Go ahead, sir.
With regards to the one question raised by the committee member, I think if we refer to Appendix C in the planner's report, you'll see that the water setbacks range from 13.325 meters from the north deck to the shoreline. And the deck is on piers. The foundation wall to the shoreline is 17.25 meters in compliance with the water setback. And as the planner's report indicates, the point at the front wall in the center line of the foundation is 11.67 meters from the water's edge. We agree with the planner's evaluation of the application. We agree that it meets the 4 tests set out in the Planning Act. We appreciate the input from the neighbors, and as a result, the owners went to another home building supplier and revised the footprint and maintained the same location for the previously approved sewage disposal system, both approved by the Conservation Authority back in March. And the revised footprint was also accepted by Kawartha Conservation Authority, and they've subsequently made the appropriate note to that existing permit. If the committee has any questions, I'm happy to answer them, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carroll. Are there any questions of Mr. Carroll? I have a question while we have Mr. Carroll there, and to the planner, Mr. Harding. I noticed on one of the letters coming in from a Mr. Ellenson. He commented, it would be interesting to see why other similar applications on the same street were denied. Do you have any knowledge of that history? Mr. Harding?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I've not personally, I've been in this position for 7 years now, and I cannot recall an application that came before committee that dealt with a water setback for any sort of new build or addition to an existing dwelling.
Thank you. All right. All right. Any further questions of Mr. Carroll? All right. Thank you, Mr. Carroll. We appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you.
Now, have we anyone online that wishes to speak in support of this application? In support of the application? Anyone online wishing to speak in opposition to the application? Opposition to the application? Committee. Councillor Yeo.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, go ahead, sir. I'm sorry, we're just getting used to the delays on this thing, so would you state your name, sir?
My name is Peter Davies.
All right, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, committee members. I have a question to begin with of the applicant, and I'd like to know what is the livable space of this built form?
20 square feet.
1,800.
Mr. Chairman? Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Carroll, did you have an answer for that, a response?
It's 1,800 square feet.
Thank you.
And that includes the walkout basement?
That's the footprint.
No, sir, the basement is 1,800 square feet and the first floor is 1,800 square feet.
Oh, so the livable is 3,600.
No,
So the basement isn't livable?
Well,
No,
I don't think,
basement and the utility space is not defined as habitable space by the zoning bylaw.
No, but surely in the walkout, there's more than utility space.
Yes, there is.
I'm not concerned about the bylaw. I'm just interested in the total livable space.
1,800.
right, I think Mr. Carroll has addressed that, sir. Do you have further questions?
Yes, I do. As a planner, if a client came to you wanting to build 3,600 square foot plus a 1.5 car garage on a lot of this size, what would your recommendation be?
Mr. Harding, I address that to you.
My whole point, you don't need to answer. My whole point is that I think these are not minor variances. I think that the structure, the built form being put forward is too large for the lot. It's much like someone with a 44-inch waist buying a 36 pant and then asking the alterations department to make it fit. There's not enough material for that. The same situation holds here. The setbacks have to be reduced by such a significant amount that they no longer are minor in nature. And that's my primary concern.
All right. Was there a question in there, sir, for the planner?
The question is, can the size of the built form be reconfigured to more comfortably fit the lot?
Mr. Harding, I think you had gone through that, but if you wouldn't mind responding to that.
Absolutely, through you, Mr. Chair. So with any proposal that comes to the planning division that's looking to have a water setback in particular, we always ask, what can you demonstrate that you need to be within that water setback? Is there sufficient justification? And in this case, we've said we've asked the applicant to demonstrate why this building footprint needs to be where it is.
Can I interrupt you there for a moment?
Well, no, let him finish, sir. Let him finish.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And they have done that. We did go through a very rough design exercise of consideration to say what would the environmental impact be to put the septic system elsewhere. Now, regardless of size, the only spot that it could go to free up space for that building footprint to be pushed further away from the shoreline is for it to be side by side with the dwelling. And from what the sewage design installer is saying, there is more adverse impact to putting a system side by side with the house versus having the house act as a buffer for that effluent.
Anything further, sir?
Yeah, I understand that. My question wasn't about the septic. My point is, and I think you reiterated it in your answer, everyone seems to be dealing with this footprint as if it's the only footprint in the world that exists. My point is that the footprint and the form built in total should be smaller for this lot. It's obviously too big, or we wouldn't be here looking for variances in the first place. So my point is, can the applicant go back and consider reducing the size of the structure, therefore reducing the size of the reductions to the setbacks, and everyone will be happy?
I think the point was made by the planner, and you certainly can speak to Mr. Harding, but if it was to be scaled down, it meant the building would be higher, and that wouldn't
No,
be...
only if, excuse me.
Now, hang on a minute, sir. You're not letting us finish here, so please wait your turn if you would. Mr. Harding, would you respond to that?
So, and Mr. Carroll might be able to offer additional commentary as well. But based on my assessment here, we've got a property which tapers the further you go south. So because it does that, there really is no building envelope left for any structure on the south side if you're looking to comply with the setbacks as required. So that means you have to go north and further west. But to do that, and this is why I still keep bringing up the septic system, this property has to have a septic. I believe that's a building code requirement now for new builds, so they can't have holding tank. And that septic has to, regardless of what it services, it has to go somewhere. And that by default pushes it to the south. So that's why we continue to go back to the septic system issue. It's innately tied to where the building envelope for this house can be. And it's really dictating where this envelope for the house can be. So because the septic system envelope can't be to the south because of the impacts to the lake that would result from that, where it's being proposed between the house and the lake is the best location. So the designer is saying. So because of that, now we're confronted with having to deal with the building envelope, which is partially within the water setback, which is why they require the reliefs. So, Mr. Chair, I would like to pass this on to Mr. Carroll to see if he has anything in addition that he could provide commentary on.
And certainly fair is fair. So, Mr. Carroll, I'll certainly afford you the opportunity to respond to that. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate Mr. Harding's comments, and I agree with them. The tradition of the committee's decisions in the past is to provide the environmental integrity of the development by usually ensuring the septic system is abutting the road and not any closer to the shoreline of the lakes or rivers unless there is no other option. So the environmental integrity of riverfront and waterfront development has always been predicated on the septic system getting priority for the development of the lot, then the building, and if minor variances are then required, then apply for the variances, determine if they meet the 4 tests of the act, canvass the neighborhood, solicit the comments from the property owners who are likely to be impacted by the proposed variances, and then leave it to the decision of the committee to come up with the final decision, and that's what we will abide by. So there is no other design options that haven't been considered in the context of the planning division's previous concerns, the concerns of the abutting neighbors, the conservation authority, and the policies in the city's official plan. So as I indicated before, the owners have gone to a separate building supplier and reduced the depth of the proposed footprint to bring it farther away from the shoreline. And that's what we've submitted, and that's what we're asking the committee to make a decision on today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Davies, I'm not sure they can clarify it much further, but did you have anything further you wish to say?
Yeah, all I want to say is that I think that it can be reduced even more. That is the footprint. You don't need to have a footprint with livable space of that size in excess of, I don't know, 2,500 at least. The utilities don't take up that much of a 3,600 square foot building. You would increase the setbacks, and I think what everyone's getting fixated on is that this building is the only building that can go there. If you reduce the size of the building, you reduce the septic requirements as well, I believe. Plus, you provide more space for the septic. So I'm not suggesting putting it closer to the lake. I'm suggesting moving the building, a smaller building, further back from the lake. That's what I'm saying. I do not believe that a 30 to 40% reduction in the setback is a minor variance. If it is, then I don't know what a major variance is. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's the end of my queries.
And thank you, sir. We appreciate your time and your comments. All right. Are there any from committee? Are there any questions to either Mr. Carroll or the speaker? All right. Being none. Thank you, Mr. Carroll, for that. And I'll ask again, is there anyone online wishing to speak in opposition to this application, in opposition to the application? All right. That being the case, committee, Councillor Yeo. All right. Do I have a seconder? Mr. Obama-Sawan? Further comments or questions? All those in favor? And that carries. Application is granted, Mr. Carroll.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. Appreciate your efforts.
We're now dealing with D20-2020-027, and this is 144 Ballpoint Road, Geographic Township of Maripasa, and Mr. Stainton. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The proposal involves the construction of a 44.35 square meter or 477 square foot addition to an existing one-story detached dwelling, including a 58.21 square meter or 626 square foot replacement deck and new front porch. Relief is required for a reduced water setback from 30 meters to 21.24 meters to enable the infill. No additional encroachment towards the shoreline is proposed through this application. The application was originally scheduled for the September 2020 committee meeting. However, at that time, Part 8 sewage system staff provided the planning division with a letter indicating that the current septic system cannot accommodate the proposal. Since the discrepancy directly influenced the relief sought through the application, staff recommended a deferral of no more than 4 months until such time as the septic system capacity issues could be resolved, and any necessary revisions to the proposal would be made. Committee granted the deferral as requested at the September meeting. The applicant subsequently modified the size of the septic tank and has resubmitted based on that resizing. No changes to the size or configuration of the addition or replacement deck are proposed as a result of the modifications. Next slide, please. The subject property is situated on Ball Point Peninsula on the northern shores of Lake Scugog. The neighborhood consists of smaller sized lots with a mixture of vacation dwellings and smaller single detached dwellings, primarily bungalows, in the immediate neighborhood. Next slide, please. As you can see, there is a site plan showing the proposed location of the addition in relation to the existing dwelling and the replacement deck, as well as a new front porch and associated porch. Next slide, please. Here are some elevation drawings noting the northern elevation. Next slide, please. And here is the south elevation cross-section of the dwelling. Next slide, please. Here we see the existing bungalow and an overview of the front yard. Next slide, please. And on these slides, we see some examples of the built form in the lots immediately adjacent to the subject property. Next slide. As well as some other examples on the opposite sides of the dwelling in question. Next slide, please. The topography of this site is actually relatively flat before sloping towards Lake Scugog, which begins approximately 16 meters from the shoreline. The shoreline, as you can see, is naturalized with a substantial vegetated buffer on the north and southern lot lines. There are no anticipated massing or privacy issues presented through the proposed addition, as the dwelling maintains a low profile. Moreover, the presence of the septic system to the south and west of the existing dwelling prevent any expansion outwards in these directions. Next slide, please. Shown here on the left is a boathouse on the property containing a habitable floor that was constructed in 1963, according to MPAC, with a garden shed on the right, constructed in 1975, closer to the northwest corner of the property. The constructions of the three buildings predate the first Township of Mariposa zoning bylaw, which was in 1978. Next slide, please. Once again, due to the location of the existing septic system, which is shown on the left, the addition cannot be placed laterally to the south of the dwelling. The proposed addition is again infilling the northwest, as shown, the northwest corner as shown on the right, and the southwest corner of the existing dwelling, but will come no closer to the shoreline than the established building line of the dwelling. Next slide, please. Here you have some examples of the buffering on the northern lot line. As you can see, it's well established. And an overall shot, again, of the naturalized shoreline. The addition maintains an over 21-meter setback, as identified, from the water and adheres to the 15-meter environmental protection setback presented by Lake Scugog. It is important to note that there is a small frame shed located within the front lawn along the northern property line. The frame shed was acknowledged during the pre-screening process, and the applicant has agreed to remove the structure. A condition is recommended in order to confirm removal of the structure through submitting photographic evidence to the Secretary Treasurer of the Committee of Adjustment. Comments were received from Building Division, Engineering and Corporate Assets Division, Kawartha Conservation, and from the Part 8 Sewage Septic Supervisor, with no concerns on the proposal based on the resized tank. Again, the Part 8 Sewage System Supervisor is satisfied that the proposal can be accommodated, provided the tank is upgraded to accommodate the proposal. Based on the contents of the report, staff respectfully recommends conditional approval of the subject application. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Staton. Questions of the planner? Mr. Strangway?
Thank you. Thanks a lot for the presentation. Just one really quick question. Is it usual to recommend an upgrade on the septic tank, but the septic bed not be upgraded? Does that normally take place?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's a very good question. The applicant actually undertook an investigation through an environmental engineer, which confirmed that only the tank itself was what required upgrading, and in fact, the bed is fine as is. The supervisor of the Part 8 sewage systems has reviewed that that septic brief, we'll say, and is agreeing, does agree to the findings of that report.
Thanks, Kent. Appreciate that.
Further questions of the planner? All right, being none. Is the applicant online? Does the applicant wish to speak to the application?
My name is Scotty Eisman from Cottage Life Construction. I'm the builder for the project. Good afternoon, committee.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I do agree with everything that Mr. Stanton has said. We have employed an environmental engineer to assess the actual overall functionability of the bed, and it is definitely functioning at proper capacity. And we do also agree that the tank does need to be upgraded to a 1,000 gallon. We are currently doing the application. We've employed a septic company, and they are probably in the next few days submitting the application for the change of the septic tank itself to 1,000 gallons. Also, we recognize that the shed needs to be removed. My question is, I do have one question. Are we to remove that shed now and take a picture and submit it again? Or how exactly does that work? Or do we remove it during the construction process?
Well, let's find out. Mr. Staton, would you like to address that?
Certainly, it is up to you as to when you move it, as long as it is completed prior to the conclusion or the closing of the building permit. That is satisfactory, understanding that some items do require storage within the shed itself.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
You have further to say, sir?
No.
No. Beside you there, are you speaking on behalf of the applicant, Mr. Cowan?
Yes, I'm the owner of the property, and Scotty is speaking on my behalf.
Do you wish to say anything further, sir?
I do not.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any questions of the owner or speaker?
No, none whatsoever.
Looks like you did very well. All right. I will now ask, is there anyone online wishing to speak in support of this application, in support of the application? Anyone wishing to speak in opposition to the application? Opposition to the application? All right, being none, committee. Mrs. Archer.
As printed.
Seconded by Mrs. Richardson. Further comments or questions? All those in favor? Your application is granted, sir.
Thank you very much, committee. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Terrific. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. All right. We're now dealing with file number D20-2020-006, and this is 63 North Taylor Road, Geographic Township of Eldon, and again, Mr. Harding. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is a returning application. It was originally deferred at committee's July 16th committee adjustment meeting due to the comments that had been raised by the Building Division Part 8 sewage systems branch at that time. Those comments have now been, the work with that branch has been rectified to the extent needed to proceed with the variance, which is why we're back before you. So just to refresh committee's memory, this is to seek relief from the minimum front yard setback provision. The building that was constructed after committee's 2017 decision to facilitate development of the lot. It was determined through the foundation control certificate stage that the building was placed ever so slightly too close to the front lot line. So the building's at a slight angle there. If we can have the slides up, that would be helpful, please. Okay, and then if we can go forward a couple, please. One more. There we go. So it's specifically the right side, or the the southeast side of the covered porch and the southeast side of the dwelling that is slightly closer to the road than what is permitted by the bylaw. So that's what relief is being sought today. Next slide, please. So as we can see here, the image of the dwelling is on the left, and we're looking kind of east down the road at the development there, and this is the lot to the east of the subject property. Next slide, please. And then here we just have a capture of some of the other development along the road. So yes, it is further back. This is a neighborhood which hasn't experienced a lot of redevelopment to date, but based on the 2017 staff report, which will also be reiterated now, I expect that this neighborhood will continue to receive new development applications to rebuild these cottages. They are older housing stock. So we'll see what happens in the next few years, but staff does anticipate that redevelopment will continue to occur along this road. This property just happens to be the first few of that wave. If we can back up 2 images, please. One more, please. Thank you. So the house overall, there is very minimal massing impact with respect to these 2 corners of the house that are slightly closer to the road. It's not really perceptible. So on this basis, there is no adverse impacts that are anticipated, and the variances meet the 4 tests for minor variance according to staff. Since the writing of the reports, further comments have been received from the owner, which I believe is in your amended agenda packages, and additional comments from Mr. Riches of 65 North Taylor Road were also submitted very recently. I think they were given to me this morning, so I believe that's in committee's amended agenda package as well. And all of the concerns brought forward at the time that the staff report was being written, as well as the ones coming in now, they really have to do with components of the building permit approval process. So it is best to deal with those under those building permits. They have no impact on the variance. Building division has submitted comment to that effect, which is why we're able to proceed recommending approval at this meeting today. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Harding. Questions of the planner? All right, being none. Is the applicant online? Does the applicant wish to speak to the application? Hello, sir, are you with us? Go ahead, sir, if you can hear us.
Mr. Chair, I don't believe that is the applicant.
What's that?
That's not the applicant, Mr. Chair.
I don't see that where it says that, but go ahead. All right. Is that what I'm hearing, Joel? Okay. All right. Then we'll go to, is there anyone here online wishing to speak in support of this application? In support of the application? Anyone wishing to speak in opposition to the application? Opposition to the application? Go ahead, sir.
Yes.
Can you hear us? Or
Yes.
And
So
your
I'm
name?
the neighbor number, I'm James Riches, the neighbor at number 65 North Taylor Road.
Yeah, go ahead, sir.
Thank you for letting me speak, committee and chairman. The concerns, as David had put it forward, were mostly about the septic system. At this point, the variance really doesn't come into play other than allowing us to reassess the septic system. And I think the health department is doing that as we speak. But my concern as the neighbor isn't about anything more than the old septic system, which could be over 50 years old, with this brand new house, and the fact that the capacity of it is not clear to me as the neighbor, and I have a 3-year-old son, and I just want to make sure downstream that we're not going to be affected by any septic problems. Is this a holding tank? I never really, that's one thing moving forward. I wish somebody would tell me, is it a holding tank or is it a septic bed?
Well, let's find out. Mr. Harding, would you like to respond to that?
Yes, I did talk with Anne shortly before this meeting, and through that conversation, it's my understanding that this is a holding tank.
Yeah. And the concern I had right from the beginning of the build, I spoke to Paul, the building inspector, numerous times about why they hadn't dug up and replaced the septic tank, because it is from the 700 square foot old building that used to be there. And the neighbor that I have now, Mr. Eula, he's considerably, I don't have any issues with him, but unfortunately, moving forward, if he sells the house, I just want to be reassured that that old tank can take because I don't know where the city stands. Are they reactive or proactive after the occupancy permit has been given? Who's in charge of if the septic explodes or does something other than the owner? How do we get the city back involved if there is a problem with that old septic system on the lake?
Mr. Harding?
Through the chair, it's unfortunate that the building division is not here to speak to this today, but I will refer to the comments that I did receive from Anne in our conversation earlier. So right now, it's my understanding that the building permits for this property are still open. So any remedial work that's required can still be done when the building division is required to go out for the required inspections to close off that building permit. So that's really where we're at right now. If those do happen to get closed, and I don't see why they would at this point, because you brought these issues forward and they've been forwarded to the building division for analysis. But if everything was closed and there was an issue that developed, then it's my understanding that it is a reactionary basis to which these cases would be responded to.
So at this point, I should be reassured that we're still in process. There's going to be other things that might be able to be done in order to reassure me as the neighbor and other people moving forward. Like you say, with development on the road, we got 2 other new owners who are going to probably build giant houses like this as well. And then just the questions I have, because I am also the treasurer, vice president of the Road Association, and people come to me for questions regarding the city's process. And I just want to clarify at this point, when should somebody put in any complaints or concerns about a brand new home being built on an old septic system? At what point in the building process should they do that?
Mr. Harding?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I don't want to speak on behalf of the building division, but it's my understanding to say that at any point. But I think that just to conclude here, that I know Anne is going to reach out to Mr. Riches and have a further conversation with him to go over his questions in detail.
Yeah. And the other concern also is there's absolutely no, either side, unless we cut down some trees, there's no way to get heavy equipment back there to do any type of septic work anyway at this point. So that was one of the concerns, but I guess that's something that the city will have to deal with, I guess. I just wanted to thank you for the clarification. I'm just wanting to make sure that there is still something that is going to be discussed moving forward. That's all. I just want to clarify that.
Well, and thank you. We appreciate your questions and comments. We understand that decisions we make here have an impact on neighborhoods. So we appreciate you taking the time to bring them to us. Now, I noticed Mr. Hawley, the manager there, had his hand up. Did you wish to speak to it, Mr. Hawley?
Yes, certainly through the chair to Mr. Riches. When a building permit application is submitted for a larger building, one of the things that they do look at is the adequacy of the existing septic system and whether or not that needs to be upgraded. So that's especially in these types of areas that happens as that's a standard thing that happens every single time. So from a process perspective, that's what we do. So I just wanted to clarify that for you in case you get that question from any of your residents in the future. Thank you.
And again, sir, we appreciate you taking the time to bring those to us. So thank you very much for that. Are there any questions of the gentleman? All right. I'll ask again, is there anyone online wishing to speak in opposition to the application? In opposition to the application? Didn't know if I got anyone wishing to speak in support of the application, in support of the application. All right, committee. Mr. Owen-Solomon. As written, all right, seconded by Mr. Strangway. Further comments or questions? Mrs. Archer?
Just have one question, please, through you to Mr. Harding, I believe. There's no completion date time within the conditions. We don't, because it's not because the build's done, that's why it's not there?
Through the chair, yes, that is correct.
Anything further before? All right, call the question. All those in favor? And that carries. Thank you. To file number D20-2020-010, and this is 87 Marsh Creek Road, Geographic Township of Mariposa. Mr. Harding is seeking a deferral. Mr. Harding, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the committee may recall, so this application was deferred back in July because the owner was looking to change up applicants and do some alterations to the design as a result of that change. So we did meet with them on site in September, and we tried quite hard to get everything in to meet this meeting deadline. Unfortunately, that didn't quite happen. We do have all the outstanding documentation that was discussed submitted now to revise the application accordingly. So that is expected to come forward at committee's November 5th meeting. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I want to see if is the applicant online? Does the applicant wish to speak to the deferral?
Yeah, hi. Yeah, I did meet with Mr. Harding on site. He was very helpful. He brought a colleague with him, and we did our very best to get all of the required information to the committee meeting. And we actually succeeded in doing that electronically, but where the wheels fell off the wagon was getting a Commissioner of Oaths that would actually see me without a long delay because of COVID-19. And then the geographic difference between the client and myself getting documents signed, then getting the physical papers actually to the municipality. That's and the municipalities declining to receive it from FedEx too. That was a problem. But in any case, I think that's all resolved now, and we're content to wait until the next committee meeting.
All right.
And I wanted to thank David for all his help. I mean, he went right over the edge helping me with protocols and so on, trying to get this thing done. So my deepest thanks to David.
Thank you, sir. We always appreciate comments of staff. They do an excellent job. It's just nice to see the thanks from the folks every so often. All right, before I go to a motion, I want to ask, because this was a deferral, and someone may not have known about it, is there anyone online wishing to speak in support or to speak to the application? All right, anyone wishing to speak in opposition to the application? All right, I do that because there could be someone who hasn't heard, and then we're criticized for not having allowed them to speak. So, that being said, we're looking for a motion to defer, and the only thing to discuss is timeline. I think we've established that at November 26th. Councillor Yeo and Mr. Strangway. For all those in favor, and that carries. Thank you. All right, now I need a motion to lift from the table file number D20-2020-033. Do I have a motion to lift? Councillor Yeo, seconded by Mrs. Richardson. All those in favor? And that carries. All right. And I guess the first thing I'll ask you, Joel, were we able to get Mr. Thornberry back online at all? No, that'll do. That'll do. Okay.
I believe he is there, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Mr. Thornberry, are you with us? Mr. Thornberry.
Oh.
If we don't get him, I'm tempted to ask committee to proceed anyway, because I think the only opposition had to do with the right-of-way, and that's really a land management building division concern, and other than that, I think everything was on board. So we'll give him another minute or so. If he doesn't, then I'll ask the committee to proceed. Mr. Stainton, I think what I'll do is I'll have committee proceed, and we'll leave it to you to ensure that Mr. Thornberry is advised of the committee decision.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I can do that, absolutely.
Thank you very much. All right. As I said, committee, I think the only opposition that I actually see wasn't really opposition. It was just folks were concerned about ensuring that the right-of-way was maintained, and Mr. Strangway was quite clear on the fact that there is a motion of council that right-of-ways leading to water will not be sold. So, having said that, can I get a motion from committee? Mr. Strangway?
As written.
Oh, what's that? Oh yeah, all right. Yeah, getting ahead of myself again. Just more curves than this in number 7 highway. Is there anyone online wishing to speak in support of the application? In support of the application? Anyone wishing to speak in opposition to the application? Opposition to the application? All right. Strangway?
As written.
Do I have a seconder? Okay, Mrs. Archer. Any further comments or questions? Mr.
Just to reinforce what you said, Mr. Chairman, I am familiar with this right away, and the people there are very sensitive to it, but I don't see anything here that will affect the right of way, so I think it's a good decision. I certainly support it.
No, thank you, and I agree. Any further comments or questions? All those in favor? And that carries. Thank you. Well, a couple of little glitches today, but nothing heavy duty. Anything under other business?
I do have, under other business, the last deferral we just did, the applicant brought up a very good point that I've been meaning to bring up with Richard Hawley or somebody in planning at some point. Richard, at what point are we going to, I'm not going to say move into the new millennium, but what point are we going to be able to accept electronic signatures for these people who do have to travel great distances or to rely on the mail to get a handwritten signature into planning? Is there any, is it something in the Planning Act that won't allow us to do it? Or is it just a city policy itself?
Through the chair to Councillor Yeo, it's just been a city policy. With respect to the commissioning, typically signatures are commissioned sort of live in that sense. So it has to do with the commissioning of an application that has to be done in front of a commissioner. So in essence, it has to be a live signature from that perspective.
Thank you, and I appreciate that answer, and perhaps it's something we can discuss later on how we can get around it, because it does seem to be a bit of a stumbling block for some people at times. So I appreciate the answer. Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify as well, one of the other comments about accepting applications. We have had some glitches. Initially, everything was directed to City Hall, but we had some couriers come down to 180 Kent Street, and we weren't prepared at that time to accept applications. We are accepting applications now. What we ask people to do is just to contact us in advance, and then we will go down and accept the applications at the back door. We've been doing that for a few weeks now, and it's been working out well, and it's streamlined things and just alleviated any problems that we've had in terms of getting our applications sent to us. So I just wanted to let everyone know that that's what we're doing now.
And thank you for that, Richard. Anything under other business from anyone? I just want to say again, Richard, to you and staff, an excellent job you're doing. These are trying times, there's no question, and the fact that we're having to deal under these circumstances means that there's always going to be a glitch here and there and something isn't going to work. I think we're all familiar with that situation, especially as it relates to computerization and the fact that it's a big part of our life now. So again, I appreciate everyone and the jobs you're doing for us. That includes you up there, Joel. So thanks to everyone. I mean that. I really do. All right, if there's nothing further, the only thing I would say under other business, at the November 5th meeting, I'm going to leave to the illustrious Mr. Marsh. Is that a good word? Yeah. Oh, you won't be here? Oh, sure, duck out, yeah. I'm going to be off probably unsuccessfully chasing Bambi. So anyway, yeah, so just, Charlotte, so you're clear. It'll be Mr. Marsh, and I'm sure he'll do a fine job. All right.
Mr. Chair, could I just offer a comment on the next couple of meetings?
Yes, go ahead, sir.
So the November 5th one, we're probably going to bring about 5 applications forward, but the last meeting in November will be a big one, so 10 to 12. So I think we'll probably, quote unquote, flatten our backlog curve on minor variances. So that's the hope. So the November month will be a busy one for us, but I think we'll probably get through most of the backlog from that perspective. So they will be some pretty large, there'll be pretty large agendas. We can't really, the way the processes work, we can't get as much on the November 5th one, but we are putting lots on the November 26th one. So just be ready for that, everyone.
No, thank you for that. I'll be well rested. Hopefully, yeah. We'll see how it goes. All right. Next meeting, November the 5th, and can I get a motion to adjourn? Okay, Mr. Obamsawa and Councillor Yeo, all those in favor? And that carries. Thank you.